SLT Mobitel, the connection. SLT Mobitel, the connection.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, telling it like it is, Sri Lanka gets an overwhelming show of support with pressure on resolution sponsors at the UNHRC.
China opposed politicization, double standards are using human rights as pretext for interference in others' internal affairs.
We note Sri Lanka's openness to dialogue on human rights and the country's readiness to continue discussing existing problems and ways to resolve them.
A fitting end. Burials of COVID-19 deceased given the government green light, bringing an end to the major debate. Major moves. The Easter Commission report recommends broad-ranging extremism action, including a ban Wahhabi ideology. Early signs. The Colombo district sees a third day of decline in COVID-19 cases as vaccination drive gathers speed. All this and much more coming up on this Friday, the 26th of February 2021.
Alcohol adangu hand sanitizer භාවිත කරන්න. ලෙඩ රෝග ඇති කරන විෂ බීජවලට එරෙහිව සටන් කරන්න. හඳුන්වා දීමේ මිල රුපියල් 350යි.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando. Moving on to your top stories for tonight. The final report of the Easter attack Presidential Commission has called for wide-ranging anti-extremism moves such as a complete ban on the Wahhabi ideology and organizations that subscribe to it. Further, the report has also called for closer monitoring of madrasas and Arabic schools as well.
The report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry investigating the Easter Sunday terror attacks has made several recommendations on extremist organizations and individuals involved in causing ethnic and religious conflict in the country. The Presidential Commission has concluded that the Wahhabi ideology is spreading in the country and threatening traditional Sufi Muslims and has recommended that Wahhabism be banned in Sri Lanka. The Commission points out that the extremist Wahhabi organizations involved in the April 21st attacks, the Sri Lanka Jamaat-e-Islami student movement, and all similar Tawhid organizations must be banned as well. The Commission also recommends that the criminal case against Islamic scholar Ustaz Rashid Hajjul Akbar of the Jamaat-e-Islami organization be considered on charges of conspiracy to establish an Islamic state in Sri Lanka. The report also recommends the urgent consideration of whether criminal charges could be filed against Abdul Razik of the Ceylon Tawhid Jamaat organization for spreading hate speech and conducting lectures that spread religious disunity. The Presidential Commission also concluded that terrorism and extremism are rampant in cyberspace today and stressed the need for social media and cyberspace regulation to prevent Islamic State, Wahhabism and Tawhid extremist ideologies from being propagated in Sri Lanka. The Presidential Commission in its final report further recommends that arrangements be made for the arrest without the need of a warrant of any person involved in inciting religious or ethnic disunity. The report also recommends that Islamic educational institutions such as madrasas and Arabic colleges be subjected to strict government regulation and that the Ministry of Education be given the task of monitoring their activities. The Presidential Commission has also recommended that all Maulwis and teachers at madrasas be registered with an appropriate regulatory authority and that the flow of foreign funds to them be regulated as well. It has also recommended that all Sunday schools, along with Ahadiyya and Taqiyya schools, be regulated by a single government institution. Another recommendation included in the report calls for all religious segregation of schools into Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism or Islam be discontinued and that all schools be given a new religious syllabus. The Presidential Commission has also recommended that the registration of political parties based on religious beliefs be prohibited, as well as the exclusion of any religious terminology from any political party. Further, the Commission has recommended that the concept of one country, one law be implemented to prevent any discrimination.
Sri Lanka's best health insurance with the fastest claim settlement. Soft Logic Life.
Pay just 500,000 rupees to reserve your unit today. Mulberry residents.
Ending months of public protests against the cremation of COVID-19 deceased, the government gave the green light to bury COVID-19 deceased last night. The extraordinary Gazette notification permitting the burial of COVID-19 victims was published last night, amending regulations made under the Quarantine and Prevention of Diseases Ordinance. The Sri Lankan government statement that it would base its decision to cremate COVID-19 victims on the recommendations of an expert committee attracted severe opposition from various sections of the public, the Muslim community especially. The opposition included the filing of fundamental rights petitions in the Supreme Court by Muslim political parties and civil society organizations seeking the annulment of the previous Gazette notification issued by the then Director General of Health Services authorizing only cremations. One of the reasons cited by the experts at the time was a possible COVID-19 contamination threat to the country's high water table due to seepage. Considering the submissions made at the time, the Supreme Court dismissed all 11 petitions. Following a request by Minister of Justice Ali Sabri based on the uproar at the time, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa then requested the expert committee to revisit their stand and look into the possibility of permitting burials. This was followed up by an official statement from the Premier in Parliament promising a swift action to reverse the decision.
සුදර්ශනී ප්‍රාණ්ඩිපුල්ලේ ඇමතුමිය උත්තරයක් දුන්නා වතුරෙන් කොවිඩ් හැදෙන්නේ නැහැ කියලා ඉවරලා. ඒවනම් දැන්වත් අපි අහන්න කැමති අගමැතිතුමාගෙන් මේ භූමදානය සඳහා අවසර දෙන්න. In such a backdrop, discussions between President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and party leaders in the coalition were held last night that gave the go-ahead for COVID-19 burials to begin.
තාක්ෂණ කමිටුව අද පැහැදිලි කරලා තියෙනවා මුස්ලිම් ජාතිකයන්ගේ මරණ භූමදානය කරන්න පුළුවන් කියලා. අපේ පවිත්‍ර ඇමතුමිය ඒක දරුම් දුන්නා පක්ෂ නායක රැස්වීමට.
Soon after the extraordinary Gazette notification allowing burials of bodies of COVID-19 victims was published, amending regulations made by the Minister of Health under Section 2 and 3 of the Quarantine and Prevention of Diseases Ordinance. It states that regulations published in Gazette number 7481 of August 28, further amended by the substitution of the words cremation of corpse with the words cremation or burial of the corpse. According to the Gazette, in the case of burial, the corpse of such person shall be buried in accordance with the directions issued by the Director General of Health Services at a cemetery or place approved by the competent authority under the supervision of such authority. According to WHO guidelines, family and friends may view the body after it has been prepared for burial in accordance with customs. However, they will not be permitted to touch or kiss the body and should wash their hands thoroughly with soap and water after viewing. Those tasked with burying the body are required to wear gloves during the process and wash their hands with soap and water once the burial is complete. Meanwhile, Prime Minister of Pakistan Imran Khan has taken to Twitter to thank the Sri Lankan leadership for allowing the burial of the bodies of Muslim COVID-19 victims. Members of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party's Executive Council have agreed to outright reject the Easter Commission report recommendations of criminal charges against former President Maithripala Sirisena. The party accuses the Commission of investigating and recommending action in matters irrelevant to its scope.
The Sri Lanka Freedom Party Executive Council, which met yesterday, decided to reject the Easter Commission's final report recommending criminal charges be filed against former President Maithripala Sirisena. Some of the reasons given by the party are that the Commission lacked a clear set of objectives and conclusions, that it made recommendations in excess of its scope assigned during its establishment, its investigations into and offering of recommendations into matters irrelevant to its scope, its pursuance of a lenient attitude towards Ranil Wickremesinghe and a harsher policy towards former President Maithripala Sirisena, and also due to a lack of blame attributed towards the then Minister of Law and Order.
ඇතරම අපි ඒකේ බහුතරයක් කරුණු ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරයි කියන කාරණේ තමයි අපේ තියෙන්නේ. මොකද ඒකේ තිබෙනවා විශාල වශයෙන් මෛත්‍රීපාල ජනාධිපතිතුමා ලබා දුන්න විෂයපතයට පරිබාහිරව විෂයපතයේ ඉක්මවා ගිහිල්ලා ක්‍රියා කරපු අවස්ථා ගණනාවක් තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ බොහොම පැහැදිලිව අපේ පක්ෂේ නායකයා ඉලක්ක කරගනිමින් එක පැත්තකින් ඒ වාර්තාවේ කොටස් සකස් වෙලා තිනවා. මේ වාර්තාවේ තිබෙන කරුණු පිළිබඳව සොයා බැලීම පිළිබඳව අපිට ප්‍රශ්න ගණනාවක් තියෙනවා. ප්‍රහාරයට සම්බන්ධ වුණ සාරා කියලා කාන්තාවක් ඇය කොහෙද ගියේ ඉන්දියාවේ ඉන්නවා කියලා කියනවා අපි දන්නේ කොහෙද ඉන්නේ කියලා. නාමල් කුමාර මහත්මයා විසින් ඉදිරිපත් කරපු ක්‍රියාවලියේදී ඔහු කිව්වා මෛත්‍රීපාල ජනාධිපතිතුමාවත් ගෝඨාභය ජනාධිපතිතුමාවත් මරන්න කුමන්ත්‍රණයක් තිබුණයි කියලා. එතකොට ඒ දෙන්නම මරා දාලා රටේ අරාජිකත්වය ඇති කරපුවාම කාටද උවමනා වුණේ ඒක තුලින් බලයට එන්න. මේකයි වැදගත් වෙන්නේ.
With efforts to extradite former central bank governor Arjuna Mahindran for his part in the central bank bond scam, Justice Minister says that the Attorney General is willing to try him in absentia if the Singaporean government doesn't agree to it. The trial at bar hearing the case is expected to commence proceedings on the 18th of March.
On February 27, 2015, just 2 months after the Good Governance government took office, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka called for bids for 1 billion rupees in bonds. However, at the bond auction held on that day, an arbitrary decision was taken to accept a total of 10.058 billion rupees in bids, over 9 billion rupees more than was initially planned. Over 50% of the bids were won by a company named Perpetual Treasuries Limited, owned by Arjuna Aloysius, the son-in-law of then Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahindran. A special presidential commission appointed by then-President Maithripala Sirisena later found that the decision to increase the bids to 10 billion rupees came about through pressure brought to bear upon the Bond Tender Committee by Central Bank Governor Arjuna Mahindran. The Bond Commission also revealed that the overall loss to the government from this act amounted to a massive 688 million rupees. However, even more shocking was the revelation that Perpetual Treasuries alone illicitly profited more than 8 billion rupees through its secondary bond market trades with government agencies, including the Employees Provident Fund. The case is set to be heard on March 18th in the Colombo High Court before a 3-member bench with indictments already filed against 10 defendants.
ඒ සම්බන්ධයෙන් දැන් නීතිපතිතුමා නඩු පවරලා තියෙනවා. ඒකේ මහාධිකරණ විනිශ්චයකරුවන් තිදෙනෙක්ගේ ඒ කියන්නේ ට්‍රයල් ඇට් බා ඒ වගේ කණ්ඩායම් 3ක් මේකට යොදවලා තියෙනවා. අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම දිනපතා ඒ නඩුව අහලා නොකඩවා නඩුව අහලා කල් දාන්න නැතුව ඒකට විසඳුමක් දෙන්න.
However, although red notices have been issued against the chief accused in the case, Arjuna Mahindran, who is a Singaporean citizen, efforts to extradite him to face charges are yet to bear fruit. However, Justice Minister Ali Sabri says that the Attorney General is prepared to try Mahindran in absentia if unsuccessful.
අවසාන වශයෙන් මම නීතිපතිතුමාගේ වාර්තාවක් ඇඳවන අවස්ථාවේදී ඔහු කිව්වේ එහි නීතිපතිතුමත් එක්ක සාකච්ඡා කරගෙන ඉන්නවා අවසාන වශයෙන් ඔහු බලාපොරොත්තුවෙන් සහ විශ්වාසයක් තිබුණා ගෙන්න ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා. නමුත් ඊට සමගාමීව අවසාන වශයෙන් ඔහු කිව්වේ කැඳව ගන්නම බැරි වුණොත් ඔහු නැතුව හරි නඩු විභාගය පටන් ගන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Sunlight Care Naturals. Obe endum kya karai?
Welcome back in more news. Sri Lanka was given a rare display of support at the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions yesterday, with 21 countries, including China and Russia, voicing their concerns over the intentions of the report. The Russian and Chinese representatives voiced support for Sri Lanka's own domestic mechanisms and denounced attempts to interfere with its domestic affairs. With that, the United States representative Dan Cronenfeld called on the Sri Lankan government to publicize its strategy and timetable for the implementation of the OHCR report recommendations.
At the interactive sessions of the United Nations Human Rights Council yesterday, representatives from 38 countries clarified their official positions on the report submitted by High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet on Sri Lanka. 15 countries, including the United Kingdom, France, the United States, Norway, Canada, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands and Ireland spoke in support of the High Commissioner's report and resolution.
We regret the government of Sri Lanka's decision to withdraw support for Resolution 30/1 and note the previous domestic initiatives have all failed.
The EU thanks the High Commissioner for her report, which we welcome. We reaffirm our commitment to human rights, reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka. We regret that Sri Lanka no longer supports the comprehensive HRC process. We are concerned about a setback of the important gains. We share the High Commissioner's concern about warning signs of a deteriorating human rights situation, including erosion of democratic checks and balances, as well as discrimination of persons belonging to religious and ethnic minority communities.
The United States, meanwhile, urged Sri Lanka to make public a strategy and timetable for the implementation of the report's recommendations.
The United States shares OHCHR's concerns and urges Sri Lanka to make public a strategy and timetable for implementation of the report's recommendations.
Meanwhile, Japan and India displayed a neutral stance, supporting Sri Lanka's need to look at its own methods of achieving reconciliation.
Japan recognizes Sri Lanka's efforts to promote reconciliation and the well-being of all its people. Meanwhile, Japan notes reports of many uninvestigated disappearances and excessive restrictions on human rights in recent years. It is vital that Sri Lanka itself takes actions and introduces remedies.
India's consistent position rests on two pillars: support for Sri Lanka's unity and territorial integrity, and abiding commitment to aspirations of the Tamils of Sri Lanka for equality, justice, peace and dignity, including through the process of reconciliation and full implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka.
However, this time around, in an unprecedented move, a total of 21 countries voiced support for Sri Lanka and against the UNHRC resolution and its sponsors. The countries included Nicaragua, Eritrea, Cuba, Cambodia, Russia, Philippines, Iran, China, the Maldives and Vietnam. The Chinese representative stated that it was his government's policy to stand against politicization and double standards in human rights.
It is the consistent stand of China to oppose politicization, double standards on human rights, as well as using human rights as pretext for interference in others' internal affairs.
Meanwhile, Russia says that they acknowledge Sri Lanka's openness to dialogue to discuss human rights and its readiness to solve its problems.
We note Sri Lanka's openness to dialogue on human rights and the country's readiness to continue discussing existing problems and ways to resolve them. Only in that way can the measures truly be effective and facilitate a real strengthening of the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. We confirm our position on the fact that existing issues with human rights in countries can only be resolved with the interested countries through open, constructive dialogue and cooperation.
Commander of the Sri Lanka Army General Shavindra Silva says that the Sri Lankan people must be proud and consider themselves fortunate for Sri Lanka being one of the few countries to have obtained sufficient supplies of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The Army commander added that the Sri Lankan government is determined to protect its people.
The daily case numbers from the last 3 days has shown a gradual decline, leading to expectations that the second wave is beginning to wane. Daily coronavirus cases reported in the country within this period stayed within the 400 range, with 466 yesterday. The only district to confirm COVID-19 infections in the excess of 100 was the Colombo district with 164. In addition, 74 were reported in Gampha, 48 in Nuvareliya, 26 from Ratnapura and 22 cases each from Kaluthara and Badulla. Of the remaining numbers, 85 infections were recorded from 14 other districts, with 2 reported as Sri Lankan expatriates. Meanwhile, 247 new COVID-19 infections have been reported so far today. In the meantime, Sri Lanka's coronavirus-related deaths rose to 464 today, after 5 more deaths were reported. The country also confirmed 2 more COVID-19 fatalities yesterday. Meanwhile, public vaccinations using the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine continued today, covering high-risk areas within Colombo city. However, in some centres, members of the public showed signs of frustration, such as was seen in the vaccination centre set up in Narayanpeta. The government's program has vaccinated a total of 393,469 people since it commenced on the 29th of January. This includes 14,866 people during the course of yesterday.
දැනට අප සතුව තිබෙන එන්නත් වැඩිම කොවිඩ් ආදාසිතයන් සංඛ්‍යාවක් සොයාගනු ලැබූ බස්නාහිර පළාත සඳහා යොමු කිරීමට අතිගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමා ප්‍රමුඛ රජය විසින් ක්‍රියා කරලා තිබෙනවා. ලෝකයේ මේ වන විට රටවල් 50කට වශයෙන් සුළු ප්‍රමාණයක් වැඩි අගයකට පමණයි එන්නත පවා ලැබී තිබෙන්නේ. රටවල් 130කට අධික සංඛ්‍යාවකට කිසිදු එන්නතක් මේ වෙනතෙක් ලැබිලත් නැහැ. එයාටින් අපි රටක් වශයෙන් අපි සන්තෝෂ වෙන්න ඕනේ. රජය කෙසේ හෝ මෙම එන්න ප්‍රථම වශයෙන් ගෙනන කණ්ඩායම් තුළට රටක් වශයෙන් අපි එන්නත් ලබා ගැනීමට අවස්ථාව අපගේ ශ්‍රී ලාංකික පුරවැසියන්ට ලබා දීම සමැදිව.
With that, the total number of recoveries from the virus rose to 664 today, taking the overall tally to 77,625. As such, the country's active coronavirus cases now stand at 4,296.
We'll return after this short commercial break. Don't go away. Welcome back. More news. Former Senior Deputy Inspector General of Police Anura Senanayake passed away this afternoon. Family sources have confirmed. Anura Senanayake joined Sri Lanka Police in 1973 as a sub-inspector. 8 years later, he was promoted to the rank of inspector, and then in 1985, he received a promotion to the post of chief inspector. He previously served as the officer in charge of the Virangola, Veyangoda, Kilinochchi, Ragama, Valikada and Mirihana police stations. Senanayake also held the post of State Information Officer in Colombo, Mount Lavinia, Patiklo, Chilau, Polonnaruwa and Jaffna. He was also appointed as the Director of the Colombo Crimes Division in 2008 and was promoted to the rank of Senior DIG in December 2011. A policeman who was involved in the assault of a law student inside the Paliagoda police station has been suspended from duties. Minister of Public Security, Rear Admiral retired Dr. Sarath Weerasekara says that he will take a decision regarding the matter based on the finding of the investigations that is currently being held.
Migara Gunaratna, a law student, arrived at the Paliagoda police station this morning to meet with 8 suspects, including 6 foreigners, who were being held under detention orders on charges of money laundering and possession of drugs. According to the police, the law student had reportedly engaged in an argument with the police officer when he attempted to give a mobile phone to one of his suspects, a woman who was being held in a cell at the time, to make a phone call. A scuffle had then taken place after Migara Gunaratna denied the officer's request to check his phone. During the incident, Migara Gunaratna had sustained injuries after he was pushed into a column. He was then admitted to the Ragama Teaching Hospital by the police.
පොලිසියක් තුල ඒ වගේ පහර දීමක් වෙච්ච නිසා ඒක අපිට පිළිගන්න බෑ. ඒ නිසා අපි වහාම ක්‍රියාත්මක වන පරිදි ඒ අදාළ නිලධාරීන්ගේ වැඩ තහනම් කළා දැන් විමර්ශනයක් පවත්වනවා. ඒ මොකක් නිසාද ඒ වගේ දෙයක් වුනේ කියලා. විමර්ශනයෙන් පස්සේ තමයි මම තීරණය කරන්නේ මොකක්ද ඉදිරියට කරන්න කියලා.
In business news, year-on-year core inflation also decreased marginally to 2.6% in February 2021 from 2.7% in January 2021. With that, annual average core inflation also recorded a marginal decrease to 3% in February 2021 from 3.1% in January.
Headline inflation, as measured by the year-on-year change in the Colombo Consumer Price Index, changed to 3.3% in February 2021 from 3% in January 2021. This was driven by monthly increase of prices of items in both food and non-food categories. Meanwhile, year-on-year food inflation increased to 7.9% in February 2021 from 6.8% in January this year. However, year-on-year non-food inflation decreased marginally to 1.3% in February from 1.4% in January 2021. With that, the change in the CCPI measured on the annual average basis decreased to 4.1% in February 2021 from 4.3% in January 2021. The monthly change in the CCPI was recorded at 0.31% in February 2021. This was due to price increases observed in items of both food and non-food categories. Moreover, monthly changes in the food and non-food categories were recorded at 0.23% and 0.08% respectively in February 2021. Accordingly, within the food category, prices of vegetables, green chili, chicken and eggs increased in February 2021. However, the price of potato recorded a decline during the month. Meanwhile, prices of items in the non-food category recorded an increase during the month. Year-on-year core inflation also decreased marginally to 2.6% in February 2021 from 2% in January this year. With that, annual average core inflation also recorded a marginal decrease to 3% in February 2021 from 3.1% in January.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.